All right, so we're just gonna get started, and please, if someone's waiting at the door, just tell them to come in. So thank you so much for being here. It's been already such a great morning, and we're really excited to introduce a portion of our conference that we've never done before. So this will be the first time we're going to do tech demos, which feels obviously very on brand. The tech demos is really this idea that we can talk about the technology and what is seen and unseen all day long, but if we're talking about this idea of seeing it, and it would be nice if it was here. And so that was the goal of these sessions, is to bring in the technology so everyone can get a glimpse into how it was made. Not only the physicality of it, but also to hear from the creators themselves. There's obviously so much work that goes into creating a technology that has nothing to do with the technology at all. And I would love to thank Gustell and Schwei. They're our demo leads. They've been doing an incredible amount of work to get all of these pieces together here today, so give it up for them. Also today, as you guys saw as you were walking down the hallway to enter here, there is a research gallery. We invited students from all over the university to share some of the work that they've been doing that may be pertinent to our theme at around 3 o'clock. Many of those student researchers will be here and be able to take a lot of your questions if you have any. So please be aware of that. And Ruth, I don't think she's in this room, but big up to Ruth for organizing the student gallery. We also have a little piece of technology ourselves here. So there's the Thermal Architecture Lab at Penn. It's run by Professor Dorit Aviv, and one of their goals is basically to be able to measure how many folks are in a room. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that every professor has their own office, but in the age of working from home, that's incredibly inefficient. And so as Penn is looking to decarbonize, how do we more efficiently allocate space? But in old buildings, that can be really hard to track. And so they've created these sensors that are testing out different ways to understand how many people are in a room. So actually one of these sensors is in the salon. So at the end of the day, we'll be able to see which panel had the most people sitting in the room. And we'll do some cool data visualization and share that online afterwards. So we are, in fact, our own embedded environment here today. So I'm very excited to hand it over to Schwei to introduce our first demo.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Schwei. I'm a first-year Master of City Planning student at Penn. Welcome to our first ever Future Cities conference demo. First up, we have itselectric co-founder and CEO Nathan King. Nathan is a LEED certified licensed architect with 20 years of experience. During the COVID-19 pandemic, while working as the senior technical architect at SOM, a global architecture firm, he was leading the team that designed the new NYC Public Health Laboratory. It was then that the idea for itselectric took root. His experience in permitting and implementation within the built environment translated into the acceleration of electrified transportation for cities across the US. Nathan King will discuss itselectric's city's first approach to EV charging and how the curbside charging vertical requires new business models and charging hardware. We are so excited to have you here, Nathan. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nathan King, co-founder and CEO of itselectric, where we let buildings power electric vehicles. And why is this important? Well, in the United States, right now, about 85 to 90% of EV charging happens at home, happens in people's driveways and garages. And public charging, as it exists today, is to really solve this problem, which we call range anxiety, so people who are driving in between cities. But what we have in our cities today is actually a problem that we call access anxiety. There are simply no public chargers for drivers who don't have that opportunity to charge at home because they park their cars on city streets. And we don't see the private sector or the public sector really having a solution for how we can scale this up. We estimate that there are at least 40 million drivers in the US who don't park their cars on the street. It's about 15 to 20% of the total registered vehicles in the country. And the NREL and other sources estimate that we're going to need anywhere from 1 million to 2 million additional chargers, and we'll talk about level 2 charging in the next 6 or 7 years. And at the moment, we only have about 200,000. So we've got a long way to go to meet these goals. The question might arise, well, why don't we see more EV charging in cities? And why hasn't this problem been solved? And our sort of response to it is that we haven't here in the US really thought about what it means to deploy public EV charging in cities. The industry really grew up on West Coast in sort of a suburban context. Here in the United States, cities has been sort of left out of this discussion around public charging. And what we've thought of at It's Electric is like, what are the easiest ways to get a high utilization charger installed? And the first part of this is to install the charger as close as possible to where people are already parking their cars, and that's on the curbside. This means that drivers can take advantage of overnight level 2 charging. So as I said before, 85% of charging happens at home. It's this level charging. It's this long duration, overnight charging, lower voltage. This is a much more sustainable way to do it because the drivers can charge off peak and it doesn't overtax our grids. So we need to deploy these kinds of chargers where people are parking their cars overnight. The other problem that we face is utility interconnection. Right now, where we do have a handful of public EV charging on the curbside, these are mostly being installed and deployed by utilities. So we're connecting to the utility main in the roadway. You've got to go out into the street and dig down about 6 to 8 feet. You've got to put in a transformer, a host connection box. All of that stuff has to be located in the right of way somewhere. What we do instead is entirely new, and it's a behind the meter approach for public charging. So what we do is we find host properties that are willing to share their spare electrical capacity that we pull out to the curbside rather than connecting directly to the utility. And we skip the interconnection process with the utility entirely. We don't have to talk to the utility. Because our chargers, as I said before, are this lower voltage, this slower overnight charging. It uses about the same amount of power as an electrical appliance like an electric range or an electric dryer. And from a capital cost perspective as well, it's much easier to install. We don't need that transformer, we don't need that additional connection box. And so from a permitting perspective, from a capital perspective, it makes the process, it turns the process, which is today many months, into the permitting process, which becomes a matter of weeks. When we thought about It's Electric, we like to say that we have a cities first approach. So we think about the particular needs of curbside charging as a specific vertical in the EV charging industry. And we look to what's being done elsewhere. So curbside charging is very new in the United States, but it is not new in the world. There's about 30 to 40,000 curbside chargers that are deployed in the EU and the UK. They've done it very differently over there. And the way that they've built the hardware for those chargers is also a little different. And that's what today's demo is going to sort of show you. We have what we call a detachable cable or a bring your own cable configuration. As I said before, this is something that we didn't invent. This is the common practice. In fact, when we talk to people from the EU, they're sort of surprised to actually see cords attached permanently to the EV chargers. They think that it's surprising that we haven't done that yet. As far as I know, we're the only company in the United States that has a UL certified detachable cable charger. And we think that this is the right way to do it. Why? Well, there's 3 reasons. The first is it keeps the footprint of the charger to a minimum. You can see that there are no extra extraneous parts that have to keep the cord managed when it's not being used. And it allows us to really sort of streamline the design. When we talk about deploying chargers in the public right-of-way in cities, we want these things to look nice. That's our architecture and design background informing our hardware. People don't want to see things that look like gas pumps installed in front of their homes and businesses. The second thing is that it solves an operational problem. What we have in this country right now is kind of a rampant problem of people stealing charger cables for the copper. And sometimes this happens 2 or 3 times a year. And so cities and other private property owners are having to repair or replace their chargers multiple times a year. It costs like about $1,000 to replace a damaged charger cord. The detachable cable model reduces that because when the charger's not being used, the cord goes with the driver in one of these nicely designed tote bags. And when the driver encounters one of our chargers, what we do is we supply them with a cord, although eventually we think that the cords are going to start to come with the cars, as it does in the EU and the UK. And very simply, the way that it works is you park your car. I'm going to go off mic. One end of the charger goes in, or one end of the cord goes into the charger, and then the other end goes into the vehicle. We have an app on the App Store. The app can activate the charger, or we'll have an RFID card as well. So very simple. When you're done, you reverse the process, and the cord goes back with you and stays in the car. The third reason the detachable cable model is important was something we didn't really appreciate a couple of years ago when we started it, and that is the transition from the current charging standard into the new, what people usually think of as the Tesla charger. So this is a Tesla charger end, but we can also supply drivers with the other charging standard, and this is a what we call a J1772 charger. So Tesla, it ends now, it's actually been formalized by the SAE to the J3400 standard. These are interoperable. Many of our drivers have this Tesla cable and are using them. So right now as a company and as cities think about what they should be deploying as charging right of way, we don't have to decide what permanent cable end has to be attached to the charger. We give the drivers the cable that they need. There's no need for an adapter in the future, and we can sort of anticipate and future-proof our hardware so we don't have stranded assets later on. Thanks. Just to talk about the business model a little bit more. Curbside charging as a vertical is different than other EV charging contexts. And the big difference is the high utilization potential that we have with curbside. You can think of a single charging space in a city like Philadelphia as actually sharing that single space with thousands of different vehicles within a quarter-mile radius. And so the utilization potential for this overnight charging is very high. In fact, in New York City, their curbside pilot sees about a 56% utilization currently. That's very high for a public charger. But most of the public charging that you might see today is still being located in garages and in parking lots near a Whole Foods. That utilization potential is much lower because you don't get that overnight charging opportunity unless somebody's willing to drive, park their car, and then walk home. And because we see this high utilization potential, we can make back the capital investment and then offer up our chargers at no cost to the host properties and offer up the chargers to the city at no cost to their budgets. So it's a no cost to city, it's a no cost to host property. We're making the model work just by paying for the investment with the revenue that comes in from the charger. We can install the charger in about 2 days. Again, this is not really that much different from a construction perspective as somebody putting a charger in their driveway or garage. It's a pretty simple level 2 charger. There is, of course, the complexity of working with the city agencies to get the permits, but that's something that we understand, and as former architects, we embrace, right? Permitting is part of what we do. As a company, we're about 2 years old. We spent most of last year building up what we call our market-ready product. and getting it out and deployed and testing it with real drivers. So today we've installed 7 chargers in Brooklyn and in Detroit. We've had about 36 drivers, just general public, sort of participating in the pilot and testing out our charger. And at the moment, we're deploying a pilot in Detroit. We have another big announcement coming up soon about a different city in the Northeast. And we recently won a grant from the federal government through their Ride and Drive program, which is part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, to deploy chargers in Alexandria, Jersey City, Detroit, and Los Angeles. That project is also going to include what we like to call an EV charging toolkit. So those deployments are actually going to be coupled with an academic study to evaluate the process of connecting behind the meter and also the idea of having a detachable cable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Is there any questions for Nathan?
Thank you, that was really cool. I might have missed this, but I'm wondering when you decide where to put these chargers, what are some of the qualifications in terms of if you're looking at Philly, for example, where would you start putting them?
Oh, I'm going to start in Brewery Town. No, very specifically. No, so it's a good question. The reason I say Brewery Town is because we like to think of neighborhoods that have a high density of on-street parking, and that is primarily a residential neighborhood, but has an adjacency to commercial avenues and boulevards. And that sort of adjacency between the residential area and the commercial area is what we like to see, because then we can get some of that overnight charging and potentially some of the opportunity charging that people have as they drive into the neighborhood and either are working or doing some shopping in the neighborhood. And so we look for these sort of intersections and overlaps where the residential sort of narrow width streets encounter the wider boulevards. Secondarily, I'll say this, that we are very interested in neighborhoods that the federal government calls Justice 40 communities. In other contexts, it's called disadvantaged communities. These tend to be further away from the central business districts, and they also tend to be underserved by mass transit. And so what we want to do is target neighborhoods where people are using their cars for their daily commute. They're not just keeping their car on the street to get away on the weekend. It's actually where they want to take their car every day. That, for us, we think overlaps very nicely, right? If you don't have that access to transit, then you kind of need to rely on your vehicle. And also, we like the fact that drivers are putting more miles on their car because it means they'll use our chargers more often. In particular, what we like to do is find out where the highest density of rideshare drivers live. And that's where our early deployments are going to be, not only in the pilot cities that we're looking at now, but elsewhere. Because, of course, the rideshare drivers put 4 times as many miles as a typical driver, right? So we'll see that higher utilization if we focus on those areas as well. And sort of correspondingly, we'll have a bigger impact on emissions in the city as well. So hopefully that's kind of a rough overview of kind of how we think about siting the chargers.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. What incentives do building owners have to allow you to connect into the electric underneath their building? Because I can see how there would be some concerns that if something goes wrong, they would need to be able to grant you access in a certain time frame. I can just see some concerns with that.
I think I forgot to mention that we pay for everything. I did mention that we pay for everything, so there's no cost to the property owner. I probably forgot to mention that we offer that revenue share as well.
Okay.
So our host properties are going to get basically around 20% of the gross revenue from the charger goes back to that host property. And that's one way that we're looking at incentivizing that. For many property owners, though, of course, that may not really be too important to them. For people who are, struggling with energy costs, though, we can offset a significant portion of their energy bill. But for, property owners that are managing portfolios of buildings, this becomes a way for them to provide EV charging to the community that they don't have to then deal with, like figuring out how to get it installed inside their garages and parking lots. So there's sort of a bandwidth reduction kind of value proposition that we have to other property owners, as well as sort of a virtue signal as well, right? We're being sustainable, good neighbors by providing this amenity to the community.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi. I had a question about do you have anything in place to stop people from camping out at a charging spot for days at a time, potentially? I know other cars have idle fees. Do you have something similar? Like what happens if they just unplug, but then they leave their car? This is public parking, but.
So where we see cities being very interested in curbside, we see rules on the books that manage the parking spot. So in New York City and in LA, the rule is set up so if you are parked next to an EV charger, you have to be plugged into it or you get a ticket. And then, so that eliminates internal combustion engine drivers. And then because you're plugged into the charger actually meters your time while you're parked there. And so then like idling fees, or if the way that it works actually in New York City is you're just paying by the minute, whether or not there's any power transferring to your vehicle. And so that works very well on residential blocks where the parking is essentially free. Because suddenly you have to pay for your parking, and that sort of incentivizes the drivers to exit the space when they're done parking. Philly actually does have a permit process to put a curbside charger in, but back in 2017 they eliminated the requirement to keep that an EV charging only space. So I'm actually wondering if Philadelphia is thinking about what they're going to be doing around curbside. And probably we're looking at different cities sort of inheriting those kind of regulations of making sure that if an EV charger is deployed, that it's a dedicated space for the EV for while it's charging.
Don't mean to cut it off, but
Okay.
we do want to make sure we can get both demos in, and then if there's time at the end, we can have everyone ask questions for both. So I just wanted to make sure that I also felt so many people behind me. So please, like file in, grab a seat. There's seats in the front here. But I'll hand it back to Shwai to wrap up our session. Just stay there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nathan, for your insights, and it's really nice to see your presentation. It's electric, and thank you so much.
Thank you.